Afade, welcome to Data Points. My name is Ryan and I'm the president of Pinpoint Guam and your host. Today, we're going to talk to Deputy Director Fernando Esteves. And why are we talking to the Deputy Director instead of the Executive Director? Well, the Deputy happens to be responsible for the Community Block Development Grant, Section 8, and a lot of the housing programs that we really need to solve the attainable housing program. And if you are trying to bring housing solutions to the market, you need to understand what GHURA is looking at in terms of buying and developing, just so you can define that. And so we're going to keep having conversations around this. You're going to enjoy this one, I promise. If you like and enjoy our content, please give us a like, share, subscribe, or save. You can find our podcast on any of our channels, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Look forward to seeing you. Fernando, I'm really appreciative of you coming out and talking to us today. And I just wanted to tell the audience why I asked you to come. And one of the reasons why is because you were central to my shift into advocating for attainable housing. And it's because I heard you speak at the Housing Symposium. And in that speech, one of the things that you talked about were the social consequences of the lack of access to attainable housing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. Oftentimes when the front-facing part of housing is oftentimes the market. That's how people look at it. But then we also see, and what people are used to is seeing kind of the end result, the worst consequence, and that people are deemed as homeless, right? And the typical thought is, okay, if somebody is homeless, you solve the problem by providing a home. And that's kind of how the system has been looking at housing. But the reality is that things have inflated so much, costs have gone up, that it's not a simple thing as just providing a home. And there have been numerous bodies of work and studies, and I'm happy to share those references, that talk about the social ills associated with housing insecurity, not homelessness in general, but all the things related to an unstable household. Now, that's not to say that other things don't affect those, right? But, you know, if we're on the show data points, we have to recognize what the data says, which is that households that are housing insecure, either through cost or, you know, not having substandard housing or not having consistent housing, maybe couch surfing, families moving a lot, overcrowded situations, as an example, those lead to higher incidence of domestic violence, poor health, reduced educational outcome and learning disabilities and developmental. So a lot of these things. And so housing really is essential multiculturally. It's central to a society operating, right? People need a home. People need the dignity of owning a home, not necessarily owning it in that respect, because there are different models of ownership. Even if you're leasing or renting a place, that home is your sanctuary. That is your private family space. So we wanted to link it to, what does housing mean? It's not a sexy subject by any means, right? But it's important. So we wanted to really relate it to what we're seeing in the community, what it translates into, and what it could potentially be if we don't do more to try to resolve it.
Yes, and where that hit home for me as well is I sitting on grand jury panels and seeing the charges come across, and you know the interconnectivity between the parties, family, friends, staying overnight, friend of the whomever, and just the alcoholism and the domestic violence and just all those things coming from people stacked on top of each other. Not even necessarily familially, but like you say, couch surfing, family, friends, people just trying to do right by each other and just help each other survive. And these horrible things happen and break people for life.
Absolutely. It's taking some of our best qualities as a community, and we're seeing kind of, I don't want to say that it's a bad thing to have that in a community, but on top of all the other challenges, now it's kind of working against us.
Right. And then we have these precursors, like they talk about like genes, right? They say certain populations have native genes. Like I was reading this thing about fighter pilots. They have a native gene for alcoholism because they're under high risk. But they say that translates into Native American and indigenous populations because of the constant change they experience, right, over time. So when you see these things happening, it trends into like alcoholism and all these other things because we're predisposed to that kind of stuff, right?
Yep. And I don't want to say it necessarily started with the genes, right? Because we were a very healthy population at one point. I mean, there's multiple factors, but once it gets into the kind of the genetic pool, it's very hard for that to come out, right? To eliminate that, and then our people, ultimately become more genetically predisposed to these conditions. I mean, nothing's ever a guarantee, but it certainly doesn't help the cause, right?
Right, but it's more incentive to understand that systemically we need to fix it at our own peril.
Agreed.
And so systemically in fixing it, what are you prioritizing? Because there's so many places that you can go and so many communities at risk, and there's only so many resources that you can tap, but who goes first?
That's a very interesting question. So let me break that out into two parts. So the simple answer is, if it was Fernando, right, based on the data I have, if I had full use of the resources in a way I thought was best for the island, I would focus primarily on middle income housing.
Okay.
But I am Fernando, and I don't control how the money's spent. So while I'm pushing that this is a priority, right? The middle income families kind of stretch the upper and lower rungs. More so, the ones that are most adversely affected are those that just make a little bit above that threshold to receive any assistance from the government. Those are the ones that are most at harm. Not to say that there are those in need that are below the poverty line are eligible for those programs. So from a data perspective, that's where the priority needs to be. But what I'm limited by are the resources provided to GHURA, right, being 100% federally funded, and what we can use towards that, which is very strict to affordable housing and low income support for low to moderate income families.
Right, and that's a structural issue.
Correct.
Yeah. So how do you balance that? Well, can you talk to me about your development pipeline, right? What you have in store, and how you're balancing that with what you see as an urgent priority need.
I mean, really, development and what we have for our entitlement and our standard programs, again, are focused on low to moderate income housing. I believe we're looking at 8 to 10 million low income housing tax credits we're looking to begin to issue out this year. Right, we have an accumulation, so those will be more projects that will begin. We're still looking at acquisition, rehabilitation of affordable rentals, and those are somewhat nuanced. A family needs to be low to moderate income to move in, but they don't need to be low moderate income to stay. So I think of that as a great opportunity. Hitting a couple specialty areas that likely only GHURA can support, right? Transitional housing for I don't want to say halfway house, but transitional housing for those that have graduated from drug rehabilitation court and just needing an opportunity to get back out there in the job market and get on their feet, right? Having a short-term place to stay up to 2 years. So we're looking at many avenues there, and those are really more limitations with the programs. On the development side, particularly, I think the hotbed topic is the CDBG DR.
Right.
What we've published in the action plan is focused on data, but also related to Typhoon Mawar is some of the biggest unmet need we've been able to identify, right? Overall, housing is an unmet need. But as we relate it to Typhoon Mawar, we're looking at what is the low-hanging fruit, right? There are families that have not been able to move back into their homes because they couldn't get their windows replaced or a door, or some instances they haven't been able to replace the roof. In that respect, those are low-hanging fruit, right? Hey, we can replace the door, replace the windows, put a concrete roof. That is a permanent house we're adding to the inventory of Guam versus trying to find land, doing the permits, starting from scratch, building from the ground up. So we're looking at multiple ways to bring up the inventory and aid in the housing crisis, instead of simply just building new houses from the ground up, because it's just not enough to meet that need.
100%. And so how can you what do you think the way in what you just said? We didn't talk about middle income at all.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So what do you think is the way to get into the middle income?
Foundation is the first thing, right? Our laws are not designed for it. Our laws are not going to benefit the middle income. That's just I will say that as I'll say that forever until the laws are changed. If we want more housing on Guam, our laws say the complete opposite.
Okay.
Right? They make it so difficult. They're not designed to build houses, right? It doesn't consider the community we have today. It assumes that Anna is going to subdivide her property and make it easy for her grandchildren, and they'll have plenty of land to give to their grandchildren and their children and their children. And it just doesn't consider the community. It doesn't consider a market. It doesn't consider everything else that is a challenge that we're having today. So if we want to start resolving the housing crisis and we want to start helping the middle class, we need to update our laws, plain and simple. And the symposium was to provide the legislature a roadmap to start doing that, to work with us. That really is the foundation of it, because more programs, throwing more money at it is not going to help if we don't have if our laws and policy to do that aren't going to support it.
So who's the senator that you think would support upzoning? Say, one of the things that Lieutenant Governor in the prior podcast said is, hey, why can't we do up to 4 units on a R1?
That's what I've been saying, right?
So what has your reception been? Has anyone taken that and run with it?
I think part of it, and I'll say to a degree, right? We're looking to be more proactive, but we're a small outfit, and we're doing what we can. We have a lot going on, but I would welcome any senator, to come meet with us and take up that mantle. Which one do you want to tackle first? I can share the data, but what I can't necessarily do is draft the policy for you, right? Or spend all our time trying to lobby, because we have multiple sides to it. But I would say upzoning, creating new zones, mixed use development, just being more reasonable, right? What we can do with the land.
100%. And so I think that's where you get the pull, in terms of, I'm a senator.
Yep.
I don't serve any particular fiefdom, right? So I get pulls from Manila, I get pulled from Dededo in terms of my spheres of influence. So it's very hard to champion one specific thing. It's very hard to bridge against these competing loyalties, right? But again, that breaks everything that you're trying to do in terms of momentum, because the structure, the process is effective, and procurement and all these things are roadblocks. So with that, I would say you need to expand on the leveling up that can happen if we put the middle class into multifamily housing, where they're the owners, right? And what is the middle class here, right? So one of the things that you define is what affordable is, right? In terms of, okay, it's $2,000 a month effectively based on our income, right? That should be your total housing expense, I think.
Total housing expense.
Yeah, total
correct.
housing expense. That's internet, that's power, water, rent.
Yep.
Right? That's total. Am I missing anything?
Trash,
right? Well, yeah. So trash, right? And so that doesn't even get you 2-bedroom here.
Correct.
So,
but it gives us a target, right? It gives us something to work towards, right? And that was the thing that I think was very clear to me. I know we use the HUD definition of affordable, and we look at it, and there have been politicians in the past who asked us about housing, and it's just this word that kept getting thrown around, right? And it was like, how do we have something? How do we say it's a goal if we haven't defined it, or if we're not on the same page on what the definition is? So our main thing was to help, kind of establish that. I mean, we're not saying you have to follow that's our standard, and that's the HUD standard. But what does that mean and translate into? Because now that makes it easier for somebody like, hey, I want to do development of attainable housing. What is my market, right? How do I get into that middle class market?
So tell me this: when we get into like GLUC, right, why aren't we mandating higher density and mandating a percentage allocated for affordable, attainable housing, right? And so in partnering with developers in this way, that actually helps them to expand their model. And if I'm going to put multifamily in my development, that's a great Singaporean mix, right? Like Teo said before, he liked the Singapore model because it mixes, right?
Correct.
It mixes. So you have, You have attainable housing mixed with, just middle-class housing with multifamily, and what a community you can build.
Absolutely.
In that, right?
And it's not just so much the mixed income, also mixed use, right? To have commercial facilities there, you're spurring economic growth. You're promoting, region or transportation hubs,
You're
right?
promoting community.
You're growing community. And that's what GHURA is trying to do. This is what we do. We grow community. So I know there's been upset about the hospitals. Like, nonsense. I'll just call it for what it is of where it's going to be. Like, look at the location that's in. Prime for development, right? Tuning's overdeveloped, and it was used single-use zoning, a very antiquated model that doesn't work. There's new areas that need to grow, for sure. We need new infrastructure. There's an opportunity there, especially so other people will be able to develop in the area. That's an opportunity zone under HUD. There's no objective reason why. Now, what we've said in the symposium and previously is you build communities around central things, right?
Yes.
Silicon Valley, that was just not built there, right? You have communities built around military bases, universities, hospitals, right? Where the work is, the factories. In this instance, if you want to build a new community, you build it around something central. Tamuning doesn't need anything to build around. It's built around what it's been built around. But we're trying to create something new. We're trying to promote, really, let's say, more intelligent and more intentional development that's going to benefit our island. Let's just do it right. So that's kind of that example. And so, while we should be focusing on intentional and intelligent community development, reality is we have to deal with nonsense, right? Unresearched, right? Political nonsense. And honestly, I don't have the time or patience for it because the stakes are too high.
Huge and significant. And what frustrates me is that everyone keeps going to the government, right, and saying, solve my problem. But the government structurally is not equipped. Right?
Correct.
You have the money, but you cannot move, right? But if you can communicate to private industry, we can do X, Y, Z if you do ABC, then that moves the market. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's where we come to the table. Like you talk about middle class, right? Well, we've been talking about middle class a lot here. Who's middle class, right? Middle income is 140, right? 140, 150 a year here, right? That's median income, right?
It's actually above, so about the 120 mark. So median income family of four, I would say it's like gross household income is around like 85 up.
Okay. Yeah. But that's not really
it's pretty broad range.
But that's the middle class, right?
That's middle class, correct.
But it's not, right?
It's not.
If you have a family of four and you're only making 88K, you're not making it.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So I think like 140, 150 family, that's a fireman, right?
I see what you're saying.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, and because the middle class income is a broad category.
Sure.
Right. And so when I talk about, I'm saying the 85 is because remember, as I said, that is the section I worry about the most.
The 85.
Right. They have no help from anywhere else, and they don't have enough to kind of have some flexibility.
Okay.
Right. One bill, they could be homeless.
Sure.
Right. They could be in foreclosure. They're racking up interest on the debts that they have. That's why when I talk about the middle class, I'm focusing on that. I'm not saying the other ones don't matter.
No.
But that is, in my mind, the highest risk.
No, you're right. And because you're one consumer debt issue away.
Correct.
From below the threshold.
Correct.
In terms of not mattering on a credit score, in terms of not being able to level up into housing.
A penny in prevention.
100%.
Right?
And so those are the kinds of people that need at risk, like credit counseling and those kinds of things to help them get past, because otherwise they're not going to get past that threshold into, I can buy a house, I can build generational wealth, that kind of thing. Right?
Yep.
But there's also, in terms of bringing housing to the market, we talk about middle class. Well, if we upzone on multifamily, or if we upzone on R1 and we can bring fourplexes, FHA, VA, they have amazing programs.
Absolutely.
Right? For veterans, our guardsmen, our first responders who happen to be veterans, all of those, like, again, I go back to the profile, right? Most firemen make about 80K a year, right? Of overtime and stuff like that.
A lot of them are dual income, right? So, the spouse may be making, so you might see them at that 120
teacher, right?
Gross household income. Yeah.
So we did the math, right? 140K, right? Most of them, you're a government employee, you're contributing to the retirement fund, by the time you're like 35, you got a little bit of a down payment.
Yep.
Enough for FHA.
Yep.
3% down. Or you can buy a fourplex. You qualify for 1.2 million with a fair market rent here.
Yep. That's true.
So if we could put three bedroom tenants in a 12 bedroom multifamily and let a fireman, first responder buy it as the owner occupant, all that rent would count towards their qual. They would instantly create housing, and that's a generational wealth build.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also talked about community ownership of multifamily, right? That's definitely, I mean, the law doesn't seem to restrict that right now. I mean, it doesn't make it easy, right, in trying to figure that out. But that communal ownership, it's one of the things I proposed in the symposium. It might be something they should allow for tomorrow land trust, where land trust recipients and families can pool land and resources to try to do things like that, right, and build that for themselves, for their families, or whatever the case may be. A compound, exactly. But, you know, one thing to consider, too, is there's also a generational shift, right? Of our generation, we still look at housing as this is something we need to achieve. This is the culmination of all our hard work. We also have to recognize there's a whole generation coming up that does not see that same way, right? So we're having to recognize that, too. All in all, the thing about, we look at all these data points, the solution is the same, though. More housing is necessary, right? And here's the thing, for better or for worse, rental housing is what we have available.
Yes.
Right? I know it's hard, right, to say that the reality is, just the numerical reality is most people of my generation in particular, right, the recession generation, the war generation, may never own a home. And I think
until
many of them
dies.
are coming, until somebody dies, or, you know,
You inherit.
or if you're that lucky,
If you're
right?
lucky.
Truth be told, or your kids may not want, right? And you have a lot too of a generation, of, you know, 2 generations above me of the baby boomer generation, who are trying to downsize, or the kids don't want to move home. They have nobody to do it. They're trying to rent it. It's hard to manage it. The properties are going downhill, or they've moved back to the States, and they have it managed here on Guam. But that is the market. But the reality is, we have more people, right? Things have gotten more expensive, right? Inflation is up. But the only way, I mean, unless there's anyone knows a different way, other than, I don't even want to say other than, because you can't subsidize your way to prosperity,
Yes.
right? The only way to bring down the cost is to increase competition. The only way to increase competition is to supply more into the market. That's really, no matter what we're talking about, more inventory is still the end solution, right? It's important to understand it, but that still has to be the end goal. Multifamily is the way to get there the quickest and reasonable.
I agree.
Yeah.
Fernando, in advance of this meeting, I have great interest in your acquisition efforts. Right? And your team is very busy, right? But what I didn't realize is that your team has been historically busy, and they would continue to be busy if the market wasn't so crazy.
Correct.
Right. And so they were telling me stories about people coming to the office right after closing of a probate and handing you, you know, basically the deed and saying, hey, you want to buy this? And effectively the answer was always yes.
Yep.
And it was cash closing and it was quick. But now the market has progressed to the point where that doesn't work for you anymore. The numbers don't work. Can you tell me why?
Yeah. So home, for example, that it's not a large amount, it's about like $1 million a year, give or take, goes towards home ownership, right? That's a specific program, right? Each funding source, sometimes there's overlapping, but most of the time they're kind of siloed, right, towards one effort. So home is the one that really puts people into homes. This was one of my first indicators, right? Coming to GHURA, when I started asking questions, trying to understand the programs like yourself. Hey, how come, you're not building more homes? And so they explained it to me, and this was the biggest flag. There is a federal limit on how much they can subsidize, right? Okay. So he'll get $1 million. We can subsidize up to, for you, this eligible family, up to $275,000 into the new home. That's a substantial amount. The thing was, because home is geared towards the very low income folks, the price went up so high that the remaining amount of $50,000 to $100,000, $120,000 to put them into a home They couldn't qualify for that.
Got it. So you were stacking.
Correct.
And then the gap got too far.
The gap's too far. So that's why we've had to transition more to the acquisition. So acquisition and rental, right? Not necessarily home ownership, because they still can't qualify to in that. We don't necessarily just give it away. We can subsidize a portion up to, they have to take care of the rest. So that's why a lot of it is affordable rental now, because they can't afford even when we subsidize it. We're hoping that will change. But for now, we had to shift focus.
And so they also indicated to me that one of the issues in you acquiring multifamily is the issue of the resident tenants. If you have to move somebody out, that can at times be more expensive than the acquisition itself.
Absolutely. So the Uniform Relocation Act applies. That's not to say it can't be done traditionally or historically. We usually shy away from it because it's kind of a big deal. But, we are kind of considering that as, because there's a limited inventory, right? And we need to keep moving programs. And we've done it before where we don't necessarily move them out. We may, purchase the place, they stay there. If there's a vacancy, we'll renovate one side and then move the tenant over. But the thing is, when we purchase, right, if we're purchasing at full price, everybody who's in there has to be eligible. So the ones who would have to move are those that are not LMI. It's a weird thing, right? Because you have to be LMI to get in there.
Okay.
So that get in there starts when we own it. So they would still have to apply to be in there. Yeah, that's one of the problems, is we could potentially have to displace a middle income family,
Right.
that was renting there for a while.
Yeah, and that's even worse.
Yeah,
in a lot of
so
ways, right?
so that's one of the reasons we stay away from it.
Very interesting. But and then I've always heard that in bringing inventory to the market, you're not necessary. Your best setup is maintenance, right, and management in terms of
Administration, yeah.
right, administrative, right,
Yeah, administrative.
but not necessarily developing. You don't have a development apparatus, but Guam Housing to a degree was supposed to be that development apparatus.
They were more supposed to be the finance apparatus, loan of last resort. No, we very much do have a development apparatus.
Okay.
We do have an A&E division.
Sure.
But a lot of that is for community development projects, right, under CDBG. They also would do home, but like we said, with home, they're not really building anymore. So, they're kind of more doing the A&E and scoping, design, engineering for rehabilitation and things like that. But we still do not a lot, but what we can afford, community structures, community development programs.
How much could you reasonably get out of CBDG in a calendar year in terms of funds?
3 million.
3 million, right? Yeah. But that's not much,
Correct.
right? Like 3 million right now will buy you maybe like a 20 unit.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And then you have to displace a bunch of the tenants. You couldn't build
rehab
one
yep.
for that, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and because like the idea was like, oh, build it vacant and I'll buy it. But then again, I have to acquire the land and then sand it up, and the economics don't work.
Correct. And that's why, it's very concerning to us. It's not that we don't want to keep doing these things. It's the money is just not going, stretching as far as it could.
What about alternate products like steel?
Actually, so Build America, Buy America provisions are waived for Guam. That was something we had worked on. We were very worried with that.
Can you tell me about what that is?
The Build America, Buy America, the BABA. So what it was is, because we received federal funds, at one point they were going to have to purchase all the steel that's being used in other Build America, Buy America products from the mainland. When normally they would get it from, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, that would still meet ASTM standard. So that was basically looking to double to triple the cost on any of the projects we were going to do. It actually, because we were in that transition pushing for the waiver and it hadn't been approved, there were a couple of projects we were looking to do, but because of the projected cost overrun and uncertainty, we had to cancel. Unfortunately.
I see. So you had conceptualized steel projects, like steel structures.
I mean, you think about, yes, absolutely. But, in kind of a more recent, like if you look at the Sinahanya basketball court, right? The open air. So, I mean, there's multiple steel applications.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's true. I didn't think of the Sinahanya basketball court, but so like why... You've gotten a waiver on that, right? That's
correct. But that was before the Build America, Buy America, but we're seeing continued like at least planned projects that were intending to use steel, right? Especially purlins and things like that, really ballooned in cost, and some we had to cancel.
I see. But if someone was to be able to bring a viable and affordable steel product, then you would be buying.
So we get that question a lot, right? When it comes to home design, we're always open to information being provided, right? But the one thing, right? The standard is primarily that one, can it meet the code?
Yes.
Two, is it insurable?
Yes.
And for us, we're not the answers of that question.
Right, but I'm telling you, like, there's products on the market that answer yes to this question. So if the answer is yes, then what?
If the answer is yes,
then to those two questions.
If that's the case, then we can do a sources salt or an RFI, right? Because if we put out a bid and say, okay, we want 2 units, affordable, within this price range, and then somebody comes back and they can do it with one of those projects, of course they're gonna have to meet all those, right, when it gets built. But we haven't really been approached like that. I mean, we've been approached and people have said, oh, we have this new technology, right? Do you want to buy it? I was like, that's not really what we do. For us, when it comes to which is affordable or pricing, that's what happens during the procurement process with the bid, right? But if there are, if we're going to restart the home program and there are some affordable builds out there, what has me somewhat apprehensive on that is because if there was this great solution that could, was much more affordable, that could build houses, there's a roaring middle class market at high demand already, and I'm sure we'd be seeing them all over the place. So I don't know if GHURA is the first stop to it when there's this huge market out there, like so hungry for affordable product.
You know what it is people are afraid to take the risk, and the people,
developers are.
Yes, because there's so much stigma. Like I tried to bring steel, right? And I talked to a structural engineer. He's like, oh yeah, it'll stand, but what if there's penetration?
Yeah.
And then he tried to propose to put chicken wire. And it's like, what are we doing that for? Why we're building a concrete house, right? Or
encase it in concrete, right? If you make it no, exactly. And that's the thing is as a private sector guy too, the private sector will provide. Somebody's gonna take the risk. Somebody's gonna get the reward. But it's not that I'm against anything from the now my government side that I'm against, that type of enterprise. It's just we're not the first stop for those types of things.
Well, so tell me this, right? Does it get valued differently in terms of fair market rent?
No, not necessarily. I mean, for us, if it meets the code, right, then it meets the code.
So if someone had enough guts to put like 4, 10 houses out and rent them out, you would be potentially.
I mean, I truthfully say, if you could put 10 houses out, why rent to GHURA? When you can get an attainable, not even like a high-end rent, right? Not even an affordable rent. You can get an attainable rent from the middle income more than, what we'll pay without the headache. If you could do that, like I said, there's a screaming market right now.
Well, nobody believes that will happen, right? So they hear you say, yes, we won't have a problem with the tenants leasing it, but I think
they just want assurance that we're going to buy it, but that's not an assurance I can give.
I understand.
Right?
Okay.
But what I can give you is here's the data. There's a whole market. Here's your price point.
No, but
this is what you want to get.
But at the end of the day, it's still consumer choice.
Correct.
Your clients pick the houses that they want to buy
for Section 8.
Yes,
right.
Yes,
but
yes.
and there's a huge amount there that are not Section 8 that are looking.
Right.
Right. If you wanted to take a test case, right, take a picture of your. I'm probably putting this out. Test case. I mean, don't do this on MLS, right? Just try it someplace like nice. Theoretically, okay, I'm not encouraging anything. Theoretically, if you took a picture of this model home you want to do, right, and put it on the marketplace, Facebook, market page, whatever, and gave it an attainable rent, not even an affordable rent, watch that thing try to fly off the shelf.
No,
when can I see it?
They would flag you for being a scam because they think you're sending some money to Nigeria.
Well, oh yeah. No Nigerian princes here, but. What I'm getting at is there's ways to test the market,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
But we just cannot provide that kind of guarantee.
I understand. Yeah. So, what other ways have you seen other places successfully collaborate with, in the government in terms of bringing housing to the market that you'd like to model?
One interesting one was in San Francisco, where they put together LIHTC, other grant programs, and state funding and city funding to buy up and rehabilitate these, I don't want to say skyscrapers, but these multifamily units, like real, true blue, traditional multifamily units.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying we need to do everything they did, right? But it's something I've been thinking over is we don't do a good job of leveraging funds. I do the best I can, but at the end of the day, the programs are siloed. Without a funding source that had the flexibility to bridge, right? So for example, let's say I wanted to do a multifamily, a new construction.
Okay.
I could do, for home, these are affordable rentals, right? For CDBG, they're affordable rentals. That's not going to be enough to sustain it. But let's say I had local funding or another funding source. I'll say, okay, these are attainable rentals, right? So you have a mixed income community and you're able to better maintain that, right? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily affordable or not necessarily high end, but attainable. Then you have a mixed income community, but I can't do anything like that. So if I buy something, I have to say, okay, well, everything because of the money being used is all affordable. And these are the only eligible families based on the programs that could be in there. And then I'm, already worrying because in the end, you ask most developers, you look at the rents for affordable. Sorry, let me take it back. If I were a private developer and I was doing an affordable rent and said it's going to be affordable, then I would be committing to no more than 30% gross household income, right? And I just take my rent portion of that, never mind the utilities, and this is the most I'll charge you. But as GHURA, I have that plus their eligibility. So if the eligibility is that you're low, very low going into the program, 30%'s, not to be near anything.
Yeah.
Assuming they don't increase their income or they don't grow, right? That is what I'm going to be stuck with. Imagine trying to maintain the building or facility with that, right? And that's one of the concerns with not having a mixed income is one, the data shows they don't do well, right? You create issues. Communities do better when they're integrated. Mm-hmm. And number two, long term, I can renovate it today, but if things start to happen, where's the funding going to come from?
Right.
If the rents are not high enough to support, and I think that's happening with private developers too. We're not immune to that. I can't just pluck money from public housing. I can't pluck money from Section 8. It doesn't work that way.
Understand? It's all siloed.
All siloed.
Right. So when the one thing that we talked about that is not aligned with attainable housing, but I didn't connect with GHURA is the playgrounds in the park.
Yes.
Right? And that's so important to community. Can you tell me what resources exist and how to tap into that?
It's the same CDBG.
Really?
Yeah, it does all that. What CDBG doesn't do is home ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So it does everything short of that, right? Can do shelters, can do community facilities, things like that. I'll say the majority of the recreational facilities were actually funded through ARP.
Okay.
The governor's office through the educational. I believe that, don't quote me, but I believe it's through the Educational Stabilization Fund. I want to double check with them. We have though, all right, we've done the baseball field. Most of the baseball fields you see on the island were GHURA at some point.
Okay.
Recently, the Inarajan basketball court was GHURA, upgraded the Sinahanya baseball field, Sinahanya Fine Arts, Sinahanya Open Air Gym. I believe the covering for the Sinahanya playground and Umatic baseball field, Central Fire Station, right? So we have a multitude of that. So what happens is every year we put out notices in the newspaper and on our website saying, hey, we're going to be opening up an application cycle. Mm-hmm. Here are our days for TA, right? If you need more, here's more information, but if you want,
what's TA? I'm sorry.
Technical assistance.
Okay.
That's where we help potential applicants tell them what they're going to need for their application, what to put in before we actually open the application cycle.
Understood.
So they're prepared. So there are I said there was a lot of Sinahanya projects. It's because, Sinahanya Mayor would always go to those TAs, right? And he's paying attention and, he's putting in his applications and he may not get funded this year, may not get funded next year, third year may get funded, just persistent. But it all depends on what the timeline looks like, right? What is the goal? What is the action? What are the actionable goals? And so what we shifted to was really housing development and affordable housing. So really, we were the prime community developer, good amount of recreational facilities, but other public facilities. But now even that, less of that, I have to put that, we're looking to put more of that into housing.
Can you do like a joint use facility, like all the nonprofits kind of
we're actually looking at that with San Vicente.
Yeah. Okay.
To have like kind of an incubator
Yes,
for nonprofits
exactly.
to grow. We were looking at that, right? We were looking at San Vicente for a while.
Because even like skating, right?
Yep.
The skateboarding is an Olympic sport. They just founded, right? They're trying to build a skate park, but then you have your rock climbers and all that stuff. They have rock walls. Why can't they just all be in like one big warehouse and they sell their merch and like have a coordinator?
I agree.
Right. And so what are the assets in the community? Because that's part of living here. That's part of creating opportunities for the
Part
people
of
that
community.
stay. 100%.
Absolutely.
And then how do you partner with private landowners? Oh, I have some vacant land in Tamuning, right? Well, can we put a skate park there for a little bit, right? And add to the community or something like that. Can I get some kind of tax rebate for dedicating my property for public spaces?
Yeah.
Keeping it at a certain level of landscaping. Why can't we do that stuff?
I think those are great things, but when it comes to like tax rebates, right, there are limits to our legal authority.
Sure.
Right. GHURA can do a lot, but I can't do anything with taxes.
Okay.
If there were, I think that's a great idea, and we'd happily find a way to partner with that in earnest. If it's a tool they provided to us or a tool in partnership with GHURA, for example, to try to do those things, happy to. But we try to limit, right, what we propose to kind of what's in our wheelhouse. Right? When it gets into too much of the tax rebates, so it's leaning a little too far out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I choose, all fairness, it's kind of distracting, right? If we're talking about, rebates for community facilities, I'm still trying to get the legislature to let people to densification.
Right.
Right.
We're trying to
We're trying to do the basics. Like, hey, if the guy has sewer there, why can't he put a fourplex on a quarter acre? Or why is the minimum construction lot or minimum lot size a quarter acre?
Yeah.
The guy has sewer there.
Right. And the ADUs and everything, right?
Like, why can't he go up to 4 stories?
Yeah, that's the ham story. You got to ask why. Why we do the things that we do.
Well, obviously we know why. These were some of the first laws passed from the first legislature in the 50s, and it just never got looked at again, right? I think the real question is, why aren't they interested in changing it?
Yeah.
In all fairness, we all have our jobs to do.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, I'm not going to run for the legislature, go through that just to come do this.
Could we do it? Can we sign a petition and put it up?
A referendum?
Yeah, referendum.
You could. That's a tough project, but I'm happy to give you the handout on that.
Right here on Pinpoint. We'll get multifamily zoned up.
Let's go.
Hey, Fernando, before we go, right, I just want to see if there's anything else, that you wish the public better understood about your mission and how you're executing it and what your plans are for the future are.
That's a very good question. This is not easy, and this is not a problem. I'm not gonna lie. Whether I'm here or not, this is not a problem that was made overnight. It's not a problem that's gonna solve overnight. It's easy to disrupt the market, and cause all this inflation. It's triply hard to try to reduce it, right? The reality is the reality. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. There were many people who made out very good with the unfettered, improperly planned increase in military activity, right? It just went unfettered. Somebody saw that ball, took that, and sprinted with it, and a lot of people made a lot of money.
Sure.
And the community is feeling the impact, and it's not gonna go away anytime soon. That's the reality. No harm, no foul, right? I wasn't here. Business is business. Ultimately, everybody in the government is responsible for letting that happen. That's just a fact, right? Now, what are we going to do about it, right? That's where I want the energy to be spent. How do we make the market fair? How do we create a fair and competitive market for everybody to where people have a chance? That's our goal. Everybody. The main thing is I don't want, for the time I'm at GHURA, me and Miss Liz, my executive director and the board, for the time we're there, we don't want, GHURA to kind of just retreat into our programs and do that and say, no, we're running our programs, leave us alone, we're federally funded. No, we have a bigger role, right? So it's always going out trying to find opportunities. Are there new grant opportunities? Can we get other funding? Is there a way to get local funding to push initiatives, right, to get this moving? Because if it's just our programs, it's not enough, right? For the 63 million GHURA puts out into housing programs a year, what do we have to show for it? Oh, I'm sorry, that's just Section 8.
Yeah.
Right? Of the 70-some million we put out every year into housing. It's not getting us there, right? We're not going to subsidize our way to prosperity. That's a fact. So we got to start with the foundation, right? If we're talking housing terms, we need to change our laws. Our laws need to say we want more housing. Our laws need to say we want to do smart, intelligent development. Our laws want to say that we want to give other people an opportunity to live here, not just those that have a lot of property or inherit a lot of property and don't want to, let anybody else have an opportunity. So I know it's a bit forceful, but that's what I want to put out there.
Hey, man, intensity is what we bring when you're trying to solve something that's serious. And so it's time to take action. So thanks for coming in and giving us your thoughts, and thanks for giving us all your data.
Yeah, all right. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Whenever I get deep with Fernando, and this is probably my second or third time, that's someone who understands the social cost. And I think it impassions what he's trying to do, and he's very good at communicating that. And so from that, I hope you understand why it's such a significant issue and why it has to be solved, because it affects everything. It affects there's significant social consequences. There's limitations to the ability to build wealth. There's safety issues and concerns, and all of it is impacted by the lack of our ability to find a solution and get behind one as a community to make things happen. So I encourage you to continue listening to all these conversations and come to your own solution, or work with us to find one. And please find our content on any of our channels: Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And please comment. One of the podcasts that we just did with GVB, man, what a great discussion. So please have that with us, and we'll participate, and we'll even bring it to light.